to move forward?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you all for having me here today. Some of you have heard of Northwest Incident Support and some of you have not. I know Joel Johnson has been here speaking before. He's the executive director of Hope Unlimited. And Northwest Incident Support is under Hope Unlimited, the nonprofit in our area. So today I'll just share with you a little bit more about what we're doing in our community right now and what things look like as we're moving forward. So we are a part of Hope Unlimited. We have two pieces that we focus on most with the nonprofit, and one is anti-human trafficking, education and awareness, and then the other piece is Northwest Incident Support. It started in 2005 as Stanwood Camano Incident Support and focused specifically, obviously, on Camano Island and the Stanwood communities. A little bit more. I just hold it. All right. So I was saying we began in 2005 in the Stanwood and Camano communities and served there alongside police and fire in both areas, and then started serving in Arlington around 2012. And was on scene with both our police and fire. And then when the Oso mudslide happened, spent months on scene walking alongside the community and our first responders. And a lot of people became aware of us around that time. I was recently actually at a national conference, and someone used the Oso mudslide in speaking about first responder response and community response and chaplain response. And the lead chaplain and then also the lead clinical psychologist for the Red Cross nationally said, "We have never seen a community with more healthy chaplain and community support than we did in Arlington and Darrington when the slide happened." So I thought that was pretty profound. They had no idea that a few of us there were from that area. And it was pretty encouraging to hear their responses. So, and just as they explained about it to everyone who was attending that conference. So we have two paid staff, our executive director, and then myself as the Northwest Incident Support Director. And then currently we have approximately 15 volunteers serving. With COVID, things changed. And then even during the season, L&I restricted us for who could respond and how they could respond, because a lot of the scenes that we go on, either in the hospital or on scene, involve COVID patients. So we currently contract with 8 fire departments, 2 police departments, and Cascade Valley Hospital. We work in mutual aid with several other of our departments in the area. We work a lot with the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office, and we work quite a bit with other local fire departments. Okay, just hitting the lights. So as far as serving the communities with those departments, it's Darrington all the way over to Camano and everything in between. And then Marysville has their own small crisis team that we work in mutual aid with for the actual downtown portion, but then we serve around Marysville and Tulalip. I would say currently we're probably most strongly invested in Arlington because we work with the police department, the fire department, and the hospital. And I think that we're able to wrap around and serve our communities best. It's pretty profound when you're on the radio and you're hearing, because we can switch to police channels now, and you're hearing them request us at the same time as you're hearing the hospital request us at the same time as the fire department is requesting us to all meet in one location. And that's usually at the hospital then, otherwise they're asking us to go to a home. And I think that having that as a wraparound where we can follow families from an emergency at a home all the way into the hospital is pretty big and a huge support for our community. In the first 2 quarters of 2021, we had 459.25 volunteer hours on scene in people's homes or at police or fire scenes here in Arlington alone. So what do we do? A lot of people know that we can provide chaplain and crisis support. For those of you who don't know what that looks like, it means that when fire or police are on a scene, they can request us at any point to come and support alongside them. And then we're dispatched from SNOCOM, the 911 dispatch center here in town. So our pagers or our phones go off, and then we respond and we serve right on scene alongside our first responders. We serve from large scale to small scale scenes. So it might be that we are on something as large as the Oso mudslide. It could be, or a homicide or something that's gone on, or it could be it's an individual's home and they've had someone pass away in their home, and our police and fire don't want them to be alone, and they want someone to walk them through the next steps. And so we come and we're there for those next pieces. So what is most common, what people know us most for, is that death or trauma in a home. For instance, on Monday, we had a call for a 2.5-month-old that died. And so I came on scene just as they finished CPR and sat with the parents and walked them through next steps and walked them through the medical examiner arriving and walked them through family arriving and what does this next step look for us for today and then beyond. And so I think I've talked to them already 6 or 7 times in these next 2 days, and anticipate following up with them and getting them connected with grief support. And we've connected them with funeral homes in the area, or a funeral home in the area, and we'll continue to walk alongside them probably for the next 5 or 6 years, is my guess, for supporting their children and then their grief and their healing. So we do death notifications with our police officers. It's not uncommon for a police officer to have to go on scene and inform them that their loved one has died either here or somewhere else. And then they get another priority emergency call and they need to leave. So then we can sit with families and walk them through the next steps and be with them as they process through what they've just found out. We support quite a bit in the emergency department at Cascade Valley Hospital. And then also we're called in for just support or end of life care. Or sometimes they'll call us and they'll say, hey, Julie, this person has been here for like 2 months in the hospital. They haven't had one visitor. They're really lonely. Our nursing staff is really short today. We can't sit with them. Can someone from your team just come in and sit with them and be with them and just encourage them? So, and then we do things like stock the kiddo stuff in the emergency room so that they have fun things to play with and things to keep their mind off whatever's going on in their lives when they're in the emergency department. And then ongoing support, like I mentioned with the infant death, there are families that we followed up with for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years after things happen, because we all know when a trauma or a death happens, you're just not over it tomorrow. It takes a long time to process through and heal well. So that's a piece of what we offer. Then as far as connecting with support in the community, we have 2 converted aid cars, Support 46 and Support 99, and there are on-scene support for families and firefighter police rehab. So when a fire happens, we'll pull on scene and we'll set up and we'll provide rehab for our police and our fire if they need it. When accidents happen and they're going to be out on the road for a long time, sometimes we're out there for families to sit in the vehicle and stay warm or stay cool. Or if there are crime scenes that last for a long time, we had one family whose loved one had drowned and it took 3 days to find them. And the family did not want to leave the scene. And so they were able to kind of camp out in our support rig for 3 days. Trauma mitigation for larger traumatic community scenes. When we had the homicide in April, we connected with the staff at a local business who had seen and witnessed pieces of the trauma. And then we walked alongside them and are continuing to stay in contact with them and led debriefings and diffusings, and then just camped out and spent time supporting. With community events, these are the fun things. Some people say, oh, you deal with death all day long. And I said, no, we're here for the living. And so when we go on scene, we're there to provide hope and walk alongside. But it is fun when you get to be part of the bigger events like National Night Out or Fire Prevention Week or the 9/11 annual commemoration, because those are fun. And it's just a joy to be part of the community in those. And then the other thing that we do primarily is critical incident stress management following traumatic scenes or challenging cases for our first responders, as well as the medical personnel at the hospital. I think it's so easy for people to forget that we see our police and fire so often in coming in and kind of saving the day, or coming in and supporting next steps, or this is their job. This is what they do. They do it well, and they do it very well. However, it takes a toll, and they see trauma after trauma after trauma, and it adds up, and they take it home with them. And so walking them through after traumatic events, but also for a lot of them, it may be the small things that add up over time that are what kind of puts them over. So we respond after the big events, but we also do a lot of individual and family support. I was trying to tally it, and I'm like, ooh, I don't have time for this. I don't know how many first responders I have connected with counselors over the last probably 2 years, I would say. It's probably at least close to 100 in our area. And a lot of people have approached me, like police officers have had their kids really struggling with what's happening nationally and what they're seeing on the news. So we've connected a lot of them with individual counseling to support their kids and their spouses as well, not just our first responders, because it's the whole family that's involved. We've gotten to help support several of our people in recent days and weeks and months, and even a few currently who have left for PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, or PTSD treatment and counseling options, where they actually go somewhere for support for a month, and some of them for up to 3 months because of the challenge. And they're saying that now the PTSD level and rate among first responders is equal to veterans. So that might tell you something for how things look. We have actually had a confirmed 4 and probably 2 more in the last 6 weeks, firefighters who have suicided here in Western Washington. So police have had more suicides than line of duty deaths almost every year for the last several years since they've started keeping statistics. And on one hand, it's like, oh, this is such a downer. But I think the reminder is for all of us to see ways that we can help our first responders be more resilient and train them in how to process what they see, and to walk alongside them in that so that we don't have that in our area. And so even though it can be a real struggle, there's a lot of strides that have been made in our area with peer support. And that's one of my greatest joys, I think, in helping each of our departments right now create peer support teams. Arlington Police has had a peer support team for the last couple of years, and Arlington Fire, which is now with North County Regional Fire Authority, is establishing their peer support team for the first time. And we're hoping to do training here in the next few months so that everyone can be fully ready to go to support each other, and then support each other in critical incident stress management following large incidents and events. So, and then another piece of what we do is provide that resilience training. We've done it some with the hospital in the past for emergency room staff. We've done it with our police. We've done it with our fire, and we're continuing to do it to help encourage them to find that base resilience, strength every single day, even in the midst of what they see. So that is just a bit about what we do. And I am more than welcome, or more than willing, excuse me, to answer any questions. I could go on for hours about stories, but I just wanted to give you guys an overview of what it's like with us. So yes.
You get into domestic violence things, or you pretty much stay out of that?
We do. We get called for domestic violence situations as well. And the police department has several domestic violence advocates that work with them who are fantastic. And they do follow up. But since we are called and can come so quickly to scenes, we're often called to support crisis responders with even mental health challenges. And then we're often called to domestic violence situations to support families.
So I was wondering, funding, where does funding come from for your program?
Great question. We do contract with our departments, but it's not very much. It's usually $5,000 to $10,000 per department to support and be there for both on scene. And that basically pays for training for a lot of our people initially to be able to be fully trained and vetted when they're on scene. And then some from grants, and then some from private donors.
just a couple of things, and then I have a question. First, I loved what you said about that you're there for the living. That just hit me. I've known you for years, the service for years. We truly do depend on it. Julie's team, I mean, they've come to the hospital lots of times with families who come into the hospital, but they also take care of the family at the hospital, meaning my family at the hospital. If we have an infant death, which doesn't happen often, it really impacts the staff. And so all of that, post-traumatic stress that happens, their team comes in, they provide peer support. They've come in and they've helped us develop a peer support team in the past. And they're even, they continue to work on developing that resilience training within all of our system now that we're connected with Skagit. And it's just wonderful that they're able to come in and do that, not just for our families outside the organization. My question for you, Julie, is what can we do more for you?
We have some ideas for some things for training that we want specifically for our first responders coming up, some ways that we want to expand to be able to offer continued grief support with hands-on pieces for our families in our community moving forward. So those are some ways. I know that we're going to be working on submitting a grant soon for you all with a few of those pieces.
I'm in animal welfare, and people don't think about the fact that there's compassion fatigue, and our sad statistic is high suicide rate amongst veterinarians because when people don't have the money to do what the pet needs, they often have to euthanize the pet, and that starts to take its toll. But we had, when I lived in Pierce County, we had somebody that committed suicide on our staff. And I struggled to find a chaplain. And I wanted to say I went through the Pierce County Sheriff's Department and their chaplain came and helped us. Is that something that you can do for businesses here or for organizations?
It is. We actually, we worked with the school district whenever they lose a student or a student with a school district loses a parent. We walk alongside them. When we had the death of the senior last June, then I worked with the school crisis team actually, because I've done that in my past. We walked alongside them, both staff and students. And then we've actually walked alongside several businesses in our area and nonprofits. So yes, that is something that we can do.
Tanner Olson online, do you actually have a question? Anybody on the Zoom call have questions?
I would like to ask one. You have said that you provide chaplain services. Are your people trained as chaplains in grief counseling and so on and so forth? Or are they volunteers who've taken training outside of being chaplains?
Excellent question. Some have outside training when they come in. We have a pretty strict requirement for what the training is after people commit to be a part of us. And we send them to the National Academy. One of our national academies is actually based here in Washington State at the Criminal Justice Training Center for police and fire chaplains. So they go through that. And then they are also trained in grief support and trauma mitigation.
Very good. Thank you.
Great questions. And that's probably one of the first questions that I get asked on scene. Not as much anymore because our first responders are very trained, but people, a lot of times when you say chaplain, people expect someone with a collar or a robe. They expect someone usually who's quite elderly. And they're like, you're a chaplain when I walk on scene. And a lot of people are like, I'm not religious. And I'm like, that's okay. Like, we're here to offer spiritual support if you want, but we're here to walk you through the next steps. And I'm going to be with you every step of the way for the next however many hours it takes. And then as many days, weeks, or months in the future as you want us to be here or not. So.
You mentioned the OSO slide. Were you involved personally? And then other question was, how long did you track and keep involved after the actual slide?
That's a great question. I actually moved back to the Northwest in 2015. I was here visiting the week that it happened. So I was up here for that week in a support role because of what I do. I'm part of one of the national rapid response teams. So I'm thankful actually to have had that connection when I moved back to the Northwest and moved back home, to have been here for that. I know that our team was on scene all the way through August, even though the scene itself was closed down around July, formally. They were on scene all the way through and stayed with first responders and those families through August. And then every family had an individual chaplain assigned to them who lost someone. And they followed up for at least a year, and a lot of people are still connecting with each other. So, and then our lead chaplain in that area at the time, Joel Johnson, he's now our executive director, but he ended up moving into OSO, becoming an EMT and working with that OSO volunteer fire department. And now he's a training captain for OSO and Darrington Fire. So.
Just to conclude, I'll just say it, before these services that Julie talked about were available, countless times we would respond to a call, and fire and EMS are good at responding to a situation to try and mitigate to medical situation or whatnot, but we're not good when we don't transport to the hospital or we kind of declare the person dead there at the business, the residence, wherever it is. So and it was always such an awkward situation to be like, okay, well, our part is done. Like we're good up to this point, but we're not good at this emotional piece. And then we would leave, and I can't, just countless times you drive away going, there's a piece of the puzzle missing here, right? And so this service fills that void. So Julie does a great job, and she's in the police and fire stations. I think Julie, you probably have access to every fire station in north of Everett, and she's welcome anytime. I mean, she has, whether it's credentials or passcodes or whatnot to the stations. I mean, day or night, if she walks into a station, there's nobody that's surprised that she walks in. They're just like, hi, Julie. So great service. And yeah, I appreciate it very much. We have just a minute, Julie. You have such an interesting story just to take for a minute about the
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, a lot of people ask me, how did you start in this? And I went down to Tennessee for college and thought I'd be there 4 years and stayed for 18 before I moved back to the Northwest. And I started working in community chaplaincy in 2002, like Dave mentioned, but in 2008, I was in a building that took a direct hit from an F4 tornado. So I was crushed into a bathtub. I had gone to the local universities for safety that night. So there were 6 women from a women's dorm that I had gone to that were in that bathtub and were essentially crushed under 18 to 20 feet is what the first responders say of debris. And I was unconscious when the firefighters and police, they were a combo, got to us and rescued me and pulled me out. And then they started inviting me to the station afterwards. And the fire captain just kept inviting me week after week after week. And finally I said, Bob, I don't want to be seen like as a badge bunny or a station groupie or like I always have to be here. Cause we have some of those. And he's like, well, Julie, first of all, we're inviting you here. And I'm like, oh, right. And I was still on pain medication from vertebral fractures and all sorts of things that had happened. And he's like, I think your pain meds are messing with your ability to think straight. I was like, okay, all right, I'll take that. And he said, you're providing hope. And he said, our first responders, our guys, they're not talking to their chaplains even right now. And they have a pretty good relationship with them, but they're not talking to the psychologists and they're not talking to anyone in their command staff. And you walk in and you're hope from that night and you're just asking questions and listening. And I ended up becoming a chaplain then for their department and then reconnected here when I got back home with some departments around here. So that's how I rolled into this. I didn't plan to become part of it, but my life has been directly affected by first responders. And I am here today because of them. The ER doc said if they'd been another minute or two, you would never have woken up since I was unconscious when they got to me. So I owe them my lives literally, and it's an honor to serve alongside them. So thank you for having me here today.